So there's been a lot of talk about narcissistic personality disorder lately on the internet. Lots of people diagnosing other people like Donald Trump, Kanye West. In the past, I remember there's a lot of people diagnosing Barack Obama with narcissistic personality disorder. There's a lot of confusion, I think, and as a specialist in narcissism, it's a little frustrating to me as I watch people throwing around the terms willy-nilly. And so I thought I'd make a real short video, as short as possible anyway, trying to explain what narcissistic personality really is. It's a very complicated topic. Research has actually looked into how difficult it is for people to understand narcissism. And what they find is that most people who are not clinicians, most lay people, have a really hard time conceptualizing any personality disorder, let alone narcissistic personality disorder. And they even find that among mental health clinicians, they also have a hard time with all personality disorders, including narcissistic. In fact, particularly narcissistic, they have a hard time with. So there's something about it that just makes it really difficult to grasp upon just a little bit of education. Even people with master's degrees, doctorate degrees, they still don't really get it. So it requires a fair amount of extra education, experience, supervision, that kind of thing. So from the onset, I just want to say there's a big difference between calling someone narcissistic, just the adjective, and there's a difference between that and diagnosing someone with narcissistic personality or narcissistic personality disorder. Anyone can call someone narcissistic. You can call Trump or Obama or Kanye or Kim Kardashian narcissistic. That's fine. It's the same as calling them mean or nice or great, or it's just a descriptor that you can use. It's not clinical. But when we use the terms narcissistic personality, which is a clinical term, or even narcissistic personality disorder, then we're talking about something that's really quite specific. And unless you really know what you're talking about, there's a good chance you might be using it wrong. So what is narcissistic personality exactly anyway? Well, it's been defined over many, many decades, going back over 100 years. It's been discussed by many different authors, most notably in the DSM. I don't want to over-focus on the DSM because the DSM is our diagnostic manual. And a lot of people turn to that as like our end-all, be-all book that we turn to for personality, but it really isn't. There are many other authors, many other ideas, many other conceptualizations. The DSM is just one of them. But, the DSM isn't a bad representation, but it shouldn't be the only representation of what narcissistic personality is. I could go on and on about that, but for the sake of this video, let's try to keep it short. Okay, so what is the foundation of narcissistic personality? I feel like in order for people to understand, for me, when I understood the foundation of narcissistic personality, that's when I really understood the personality disorder. It was the same with borderline or histrionic or avoidant or anything, or even attachment styles. I remember learning about these things and not really quite getting it. But once I understood the genesis or the foundation of these things, then I felt like I really understood it. So what's the foundation of narcissistic personality? Well, as you might be able to know, this is that it comes from mistreatment in childhood. Some people say that it can emerge out of, biology, like you're just born with narcissistic personality, so to speak. But in my experience, in my clinical experience, everyone that I've treated with narcissistic personality has experienced significant mistreatment in their childhood. And the greater the mistreatment, the greater the narcissistic personality. So this sort of mistreatment can be overt, things that are quite obvious, like being sexually abused, physically abused, abandoned, this kind of thing. But there are other forms of mistreatment that are harder to detect, even to the individual who went through it. Subtle things like your parents were depressed or they were alcoholics or your parents were raised by alcoholics. These things can lead to certain parenting or family environments that might, on the outside or on the surface, might seem really great, but underneath there's an underlying neglect that is happening to the child that results in the child having to develop narcissism. So I could go into detail on that, but again, just to move on. So this mistreatment results in two things. One is that people, regardless of whether or not they're narcissistic or some other coping strategy, they develop two things. One is that they develop insecure attachment. In a nutshell, this basically means that the individual doesn't really believe that other people will love them and be there for them. And so they're insecure about their attachments with other people. And so, keep that in mind. The second thing is mistreatment often results in people not developing a sense of self. This has to be sort of on the higher end of mistreatment, but when we have that, oftentimes someone will not develop a sense of self. What is a sense of self? Well, a sense of self is really quite complicated, but in a nutshell, it's when you are a parent or let me say, when you're a kid and you're 3 years old and you just have an emotional feeling. You're just like upset and you're angry and you just start crying or you start screaming or you throw a tantrum or something. In those moments, the 3-year-old might actually not know why they are throwing a tantrum. They're just upset and they don't know why. It takes a parent who is attentive and loving and has the capacity to actually turn to the child and diagnose the child. What is wrong with this child? Oh, they're tired, they're cold, they're hot, they're hungry. Someone on the playground didn't treat them well. They want the toy and it's up on a shelf and they can't access it, or they're sick or something. The parent is there to know what is wrong with the child. And what the parent does is they go to the child and they tend to the child, but they also explain to the child what's happening. They're like, oh, you're upset because you have to go to bed and you don't want to miss out on watching TV with your older siblings, or, oh, you're upset because you got rejected on the playground. Yes, I understand. That makes you sad. And you repeat that over and over and over again with the child, and the child starts to connect their emotional state, their wishes, their thoughts, their urges with some kind of wording, some verbalization of what's happening. Oh, I see. I'm upset because of this, or I'm feeling this emotion. It's a very complicated topic, but I'm hoping I'm explaining it right. So through that process, you develop a sense of self. You know who you are, you know what your emotions are, you know how you feel, you know what your needs are within reason, enough self-awareness that you can move into later stages of life, later childhood, adulthood, and you know what you want and you can actually enact those needs. It's like, ooh, I'm hungry, I'll go get food. Ooh, I want love from my spouse, I will ask for love from my spouse. Ooh, I want friendship, or I need entertainment, or I need to be creative today. There are people who lack a sense of self who actually don't know those. They have urges and needs on the inside, but they don't know what they are because they were never explained to them early in life. They can develop a sense of self later on, but they learned early in life they needed to cut themselves off from their self in order to cope. Anyway, it's a complicated thing. So there are two things resulting from mistreatment. Like I said, one is insecure attachment, the notion that no one's going to really be there for you. It's a very sad thing, but it's what kids will learn early in life if they're being mistreated. The second thing is that they just don't know who they are. They don't know what they want, and they don't know how they feel. And these are very important things to develop early in life. So the older child, the 6, 7, 8, 9-year-old, they're experiencing tantrums, they're experiencing attachment insecurity, they're experiencing confusion and relationship problems, and they need some way to cope with that. And there are many different ways to cope with it. There are borderline ways, there are histrionic ways, there's avoidant ways, there's preoccupied ways, there's depressive ways, anxious ways, hypervigilant ways, eating disorder ways. There's a lot of ways to cope with this, and one of them also is narcissism. Narcissism is a coping strategy dealing with this inability to know who you are and what you want, and also this very painful experience of not feeling like anyone loves you. And so what narcissism is that the child learns, if I prop up this false self, this wonderful, perfect, awesome self, it helps me in a number of ways. One is that it tricks other people to love me. Because if I'm perfect and I'm wonderful and I'm special, then I tend to get more love from other people. And that's what I'm really looking for, because I'm really looking for love and attachment and security. And so if I prop up this perfect, wonderful, superior self, I tend to get more love. The other thing is that when they prop up this false self, they actually believe what they're propping up partially, and this actually gives them some self-esteem, of which they have almost none of. So they're like, ooh, when I convince myself that I'm perfect and superior to everybody, then I have at least some self-esteem in the world. And when I don't do that, then I have no self-esteem. The other thing is that by propping up this self, it distracts them from the fact that they don't even know who they are and what they want. This propped up false self actually gives them some direction in life, of which without that, they wouldn't have at all. Okay, so at the end here, let's look at the DSM criteria. And normally when people read these criteria, I think they misunderstand it. But when we understand what I've explained so far, the foundation of narcissism, then I think it brings it into its full colors. And these are my paraphrasing of the DSM, so just keep that in mind. So number one in the DSM, people with narcissism are identified in the DSM as exaggerating about their achievements. I'm awesome. They have very flowery resumes. They might even lie. I won this award, or I've been around the world when they haven't, or I once had sex with George Clooney or something. Some kind of exaggeration, or maybe not just lies, but overemphasizing of their achievements. But anyway, so they're not doing this because they just love to do that. They're doing it because they're in a constant state of feeling worthless and unlovable. So when they prop this up, they're like, well, maybe if I look at this false self, I'll believe that I'm awesome, because if I don't look at this, I have to just look at myself, and I do not feel awesome. In fact, I feel like I'm nothing, and I feel like no one will ever love me. They're also doing this because it actually they learn how to prop up a false self that people are attracted to. At least that's what they're hoping for. Number two, the DSM says that people with narcissism have fantasies of achieving greatness. They'll frequently ruminate about ooh, when I'm president of the United States, or when I'm the best player in the NBA, or when I am the most popular psychology podcast of all time, for example. This constant rumination. This is to uphold the person with narcissism. It's to uphold their shaky self-esteem. It's focusing on some future, possibility to give them some sense of worth, and it also distracts them. Number three is people with narcissism, they outwardly believe that they are better than other people. They'll say to other people, oh, I'm better than him, or I'm better than she is, or they'll do things that are subtle. They might make Instagram posts that make them look better than other people. It can be quite subtle too. Narcissism can be quite subtle. So these can be things that are outward. And again, it's just a facade. It's just to trick themselves into believing that they have worth. The thing is they actually do have worth. So I have clients with narcissism, and they believe that they're worthless, but I'm from the outside saying you absolutely do have worth. It's just not you don't have to prop up this false self to get worth. You actually are a lovable, likable person deep down on the inside. We just have to, focus on that. Now, it should be pointed out that when people with narcissism have their narcissistic supply challenged, they can become quite angry. And the reason for that is because they feel quite hurt. So if something gets in the way, or if you get in the way of them feeling like they're superior to other people, or that they're better, or, whatnot, then that actually causes them to panic. And when they panic, or they turn inward, and they might feel quite hurt, and then they start attacking other people. Anyway, I hope I explained that well enough. Number four is the DSM talks about people with narcissism requiring a lot of admiration, because if the admiration runs out, again, they have to focus on themselves, and they're terrified of that situation. Number five, people with narcissism have unreasonable expectations of special treatment from other people. I think I explained that already. Number six is they might take advantage of other people. So they might actually, control other people or use other people, not because they're evil. This is an important point, is that on the internet, a lot of times narcissism is described as sort of an evil thing, like, oh, that person's narcissistic, they just use everyone around them. They're so full of themselves. And, and this conceptualization it can look that way for sure, but that's not really what's happening. What's happening is that Again, because the person was neglected and mistreated growing up, they actually don't believe that they will get love and attention from other people automatically. So they feel like and because everyone wants love and attention, everyone wants to feel attachment security, the only way they feel like they can get it is if they take it from other people, if they control other people and this kind of thing. And so I hope that makes it clear. Number 7, in the DSM, it says that people with narcissism, that they lack empathy. People with narcissism lack empathy. This is actually not true. Plenty of other specialists will say this as well. It's not that they lack empathy, it's that they have an impaired empathy. They have empathy, but it's impaired. Now, there are some extreme cases like Charles Manson, who was narcissistic. He absolutely did not have empathy for other people. But I would argue that a better conceptualization of Charles Manson is that he was psychopathic and narcissistic, or he was a psychopathic version of narcissism, or he was a narcissistic version of psychopathy or something. It's just, there's a lot of debate and it's just opinion. It's not like it's science. But so again, people with narcissism do have empathy, but because they're in a constant state of pain, it's hard for them to pay attention to other people's empathy. They're so distracted with their constant need to prop up this perfect superior self. In their eyes, they believe that's the only way they're going to get love and attention. So they're really focusing on that, and they need everyone else to focus on that. And that's so consuming that they actually don't have the time to pay attention to other people, but they actually do care. And when they are given that chance, they actually can have empathy, tremendous empathy for other people. My clients whom I've treated with narcissism, I have found them to be some of the most caring people on the planet. Number 8 is people with narcissism are envious of other people. And this makes sense, right? You need to constantly uphold this narcissistic self, and if other people are better or doing better or more successful, then this challenges this person's ability to be superior, and they want that. If only I had that kind of thing. Number 9, the last criteria in DSM is people with narcissism are often arrogant, described as arrogant. This is the last point I want to bring up regarding arrogance, is that people with narcissism, when they're being mistreated growing up, they learn that in order to cope with the fact that they're not getting the love and attention that they need, they end up tricking themselves into believing that they don't need anybody. You'll often hear narcissistic people say this. They'll say like, well, I don't really need people. I'm fine on my own. And that's because they convinced themselves when they were very young that that was true, even though it's not true. But they convinced themselves that that was true because they needed to, because they weren't getting the love and attention that they needed. And this can come across as very arrogant to other people, very aloof. Okay, so I hope that helps to flesh out the understanding of narcissistic personality. Understanding the foundation of narcissism, I think, really helps to understand the sort of observed manifestations of narcissism. I hope that's true. If you have questions, you can email me at contact@psychologyinseattle.com. If you want more information on narcissism, my podcast, Psychology in Seattle, we have many episodes on narcissism, including an 11-hour deep dive, an 11-hour episode of the podcast in which I dedicated 11 hours and months, if not years of my life preparing for those 11 hours, talking about all the ins and outs of narcissistic personality. But in order to get access to that, you have to be a patron of the podcast by going to patreon.com. So become a patron and you'll get access to those 11 hours. All right. Thanks for watching this video, and please take care of yourself because you deserve it. You really, really do.